You know what's strange? We criticize boomers. We overanalyze millennials. We can't stop talking about Gen Z. But the generation that actually raised us, the one that hardwired how we deal with stress, work and conflict, barely gets examined at all. Generation X, born roughly from the mid-60s to the early 80s, the figure-it-out generation. And here's the uncomfortable part. Maybe we didn't misunderstand them. Maybe we judged them using rules that didn't exist when they were growing up. And once you understand what shaped them, the way they handle stress, emotion and conflict will make a lot more sense. Picture this. Now, rewind. 1979. You're 10. You get off the bus. The street is quiet. You unlock the door yourself. No phone, no check-in, nobody tracking you. You turn on the TV for noise. You wait. When you're often that alone, your brain learns one rule. If something goes wrong, it's on you. By the early 80s, millions of kids were regularly home alone after school. In 1984, the US Census Bureau estimated over 7 million children ages 5 to 13 were unsupervised in the afternoon. This wasn't rare, this was normal. You're 10, the stove clicks. You try not to mess up, because when your parents get home, it's simple. If everything looks fine, you're fine. If it doesn't, you'll hear about it. Psychologists call it avoidant attachment, not because there's no love, but because relying on people didn't feel safe. So you get good at staying calm, at solving problems quietly. Or this, you fall off your bike, your knee's bleeding, someone says, "You're fine." Not cruel, just normal. So you stand up. You learn something early. Emotions don't change the task. Over time, that builds an internal locus of control, the belief that outcomes depend on you. It builds grit. It also makes asking for help harder. And that was just home. The background was worse. You're in a classroom. A TV rolls in on a metal cart. There's a news segment about nuclear weapons. You don't understand all of it, but you understand the tone. Serious. Then class continues. Open your math book. When uncertainty is constant, war, scandal, recession, your brain starts scanning for threat. Not paranoia, just calibration. If chaos is possible, you prepare. In 1981, US divorce rates peaked at nearly 5 per 1,000 people, one of the highest levels in modern history. That's millions of kids packing a weekend bag. You're 11. One parent says, "We'll figure it out." No long emotional processing, just logistics. Stability can change fast, so you stop assuming it will stay. Add the early 80s recession. Unemployment hits 10.8%. Factories close, industries shrink. You're at the dinner table, a letter sits on the counter, position eliminated. Nobody screams, nobody collapses, you just adjust. Resumes get printed, applications get filled out. The lesson lands quietly. Nothing is guaranteed. There's a name for it, defensive pessimism. You don't assume things will work out automatically, you prepare instead. You don't over-celebrate, you don't over-promise, and trust comes last. It doesn't look optimistic, it looks steady. Public scandals expose leaders as flawed, trust shifts, title matters less, competence matters more. That's not rebellion, they've just seen it before. Latchkey afternoons, divorce, layoffs, stacked together. They train a generation to scan and move. They don't panic, they adjust. Not cold, just adaptive. And when adaptation starts in childhood, it becomes personality. That mindset follows them into adulthood. You're 13, 5:30 a.m., throwing newspapers onto porches. Not for a brand, because you said you would. Work first, talk later. Or you're 17 at a grocery store. No calculator. The line is building behind you. You don't freeze, you calculate. Or you're in a driveway with a car hood open. No YouTube tutorial, no Reddit thread. You try, you fail, you adjust, you try again. Before the internet, almost everything required friction. If you wanted something, you worked for it. It's called effortful processing. It takes effort. It sticks. When you work for the answer, it stays. Gen X grew up in an effort-heavy world that repeated friction builds something, a kind of mechanical confidence. Not, "I believe in myself," more like, "If this breaks, I'll figure it out." You've seen layoffs, so you rely on skill, not structure. Titles matter less, performance matters more. Be valuable, not visible. And that philosophy didn't stop at the office. Step back again. This is the same generation that grew up without social media. No personal brand, no curated identity. You weren't building an audience, you were building competence. Mistakes weren't permanent, they faded. That changes how you take risks. Then look at what millennials grew up with. Internet expansion, social media, permanent records. Visibility became currency. By the 1990s and early 2000s, parenting research emphasized emotional validation and self-esteem more explicitly. So, two things happened at once. Gen X learned to handle friction. Millennials learned to talk through it. Neither is wrong, but they don't translate cleanly. When friction-trained people meet articulation-trained people, tension shows up. Gen X sees oversharing. Millennials see emotional shutdown. Both think they're the rational one. Underneath, it's just different training. One trained to endure quietly, one trained to process openly. And if you don't understand the training, you misread the behavior. Picture a conversation. You say, "I've been feeling anxious." The response isn't anger, it's confusion. About what? Because for them, that feeling would have been handled privately, not announced. It's just two different ways of handling emotion. Suppression looks calm, expression looks dramatic. Put them in the same room and tension shows up fast. At work, a deadline is missed. Gen X manager, "What's the solution?" Millennial employee, "I've been overwhelmed." Both are telling the truth. One was trained that pressure equals action. The other was trained that pressure requires acknowledgement first. They're applying the same system that kept them safe growing up. Reported anxiety rates are higher in younger generations. Gen X experienced anxiety too, they just didn't label it in the same way. If instability was your baseline, stress felt ordinary. You didn't call it anxiety, you called it life. If you grew up with Gen X, what was the phrase you heard the most? And that difference matters more than we think, because it's still shaping conversations today. It doesn't make one stronger, it means they were trained differently. Last step back. Gen X is often called the forgotten generation, not because they did nothing, but because they didn't broadcast. They built skills quietly, they handled stress privately. Competence mattered more than visibility. And in doing that, they shaped the environment millennials grew up in. More supervision, more emotional language, more structure across the board. Millennials are, in part, the outcome of Gen X adjusting the system they inherited. Gen X didn't grow up with emotional vocabulary, but many made sure their kids did. They didn't grow up with stability, but many tried to create more of it. That doesn't always show up as warmth. Sometimes it shows up as pressure. Sometimes as silence. Sometimes just as, "You'll be fine." And that's it. Silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means, "I survived this, you can too." If you step back, something becomes clear. Gen X isn't emotionally unavailable. They're efficiency trained. Millennials aren't emotionally fragile. They're expression trained. Put them together without context, and it looks like conflict. Add context, and it doesn't look so simple anymore. Maybe the real misunderstanding isn't about who's stronger. It's about different survival strategies. If you grew up with Gen X, think about this. When things went wrong, did they panic? Or did they just move? That difference probably explains more than stereotypes do.